Hey guys, welcome back to the Dating Games podcast. This podcast is designed to help you navigate this complex world that is modern dating, from healing heartbreak to setting boundaries, building confidence, and just becoming an all-around better person for your relationships. I am Nathalie Lennon, your one and only host. This is a very special day because it is our first time to welcome a guest to the pod, and we are beyond lucky to be blessed with his time, his expertise, his experience, and his presence today. I want to really refer to my guests this season as co-hosts because that is what I am going to see them as. Now today, we're going to talk all about building yourself back up after a bad breakup, finding yourself again, re-establishing your self-worth, your self-esteem, and your overall sense of independence. How do you get over a breakup? I think many of you will agree with me here in saying that we rarely hear the male perspective on this. So I'm thrilled that today's co-host is truly an open book and very kindly willing to share some of his personal stories with us today. What he has been through in the last year, I really wouldn't wish it on a single soul. You wouldn't wish heartbreak on anyone. We know that, we've said it here before. But it is going to allow him to bring so much depth to this episode. He has a combined total of over 500,000 followers, an online fitness coach. He hosts one of Ireland and the UK's top health podcasts, which is regularly featured at number 1 on the iTunes health charts. He is a 3-time best-selling author with The Fitness Mindset, Rewire Your Mindset, and The Keane Edge, Mastering the Mindset for Real Lasting Fat Loss. We are welcoming Brian Keane to the show. Hello, how are you?
Natalie, what an amazing introduction, and thank you so much for having me on.
This is the radio host in me. Like, we're welcoming you to the podcast even, not the show. I'm just so used to doing such a big hype when I'm starting off a show or an episode. Brian, I'm so grateful for your time today.
Oh, I'm really looking forward to this. Something that I've been a long-term subscriber to, Nat, as you know, is making your mess your message. And even off the back of some of the content I've been creating through my podcast recently, the DMs, particularly from men and males, because this isn't really talked about, because when I was trying to work through some of the heartbreak and breakup stuff over the last few months, it was from a female perspective mostly.
Yeah.
And that helped. But I do remember in some of the more darker days thinking, if I ever come out of this, I will try and help other men come through, because as you mentioned, it's such a peculiar thing to feel. And a peculiar experience because it's so universal, yet everyone's experience is so subjective.
Yeah.
And when you understand and feel that everything happens for a reason, I definitely think, and one of my friends told me that in the gift of loss is empathy. And I've got a daughter at home. She's going to be 9 in May. And I remember thinking, I never would have empathized with this. I never got breakups before, and I'm nearly embarrassed to admit that as somebody that fucking spirals in October and November.
Yeah, but you shouldn't be embarrassed to admit that. I mean, you're lucky in a sense that you didn't experience like deep and utter heartbreak before last year. But at the same time, once you do experience it, I think it changes you as a person for the rest of your life.
100%. I think it has definitely made me more well-rounded.
Yeah.
But also, and a lot of my closest friends have said it to me, that they feel there's a shift in me, that I'm showing up very differently for everybody in my life. And because I kept a lot of it to myself. And just to give a little bit of a backstory.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
I was engaged with my partner at the time, and she left in August. And it, in hindsight, was coming for quite a long time. But at the time, it felt like somebody had pulled the rug of the world underneath my feet.
Yeah.
And I was okay for a couple of weeks. And then a few things happened, external things, that led me down a path of just spiraling completely.
And when you say spiraling, first off, Brian, we've spoken a good bit before coming on here to record the podcast. You know how much I like wish you never went through any of this. And it's so great now to see you, I guess, just feeling yourself again, feeling better again, speaking about this, putting yourself out there again. I don't know if it's okay for me to say you should be proud of yourself for that. I think I've said this on the pod before. I heard a lady once say, you should never say I'm so proud of you. For some reason, when people that don't know me that well say I'm so proud of you, I'm a bit, I don't know why I feel like it's kind of condescending unless I know them well. But I think it always is nice to hear you should be proud of yourself, because it's not easy. Like you said, when things ended and when she left, I mean, you were engaged. You thought this was endgame. Initially you were okay, and then you said you spiraled. What did that spiral look like? And was there a moment where you kind of went, crap, I'm not okay?
Yeah, it was interesting because like I have nothing bad to say about my ex-partner. She's an incredible person, a great soul. Our relationship dynamic didn't work.
I think it's really nice to hear you say that about an ex, and it's nice for people to hear that you can have that opinion. Yeah, but your dynamic didn't work.
Yeah, the dynamic didn't work. But I was still under a bit of an illusion that, and we said this before I went on air, and 3 of my friends who know me the best, who actually don't know each other, Orla, Paul and Dan are their names. They're 3 independent. They're all over the world in terms of where they live, but they've been my closest friends for more than a decade. And they all said to me in some way, shape or form, and Paul's line landed the most was, your 100% effort is still only 50% in a relationship. And I had the mindset going in, as somebody that has had some external success with fitness and business, that I can make anything.
Some, he says. So you are so successful. Anyway, humble man.
Well,
moving on.
I appreciate that. It says success is so relative. But but things that I was in control of.
Yeah.
And I thought the same with the relationship. Even if things aren't good, I can make them work. I felt, I don't know if you ever saw the movie The Butterfly Effect with Ashton Kutcher, where he goes back in time regularly and he's constantly going back and going, I can fix this. I can fix the past. I can fix the past.
That's I haven't, but I saw something similar with a similar name that I think we had to watch in school that kind of made you realise.
Boxer from Animal Farm was the same. Yeah, it's one of my favourite books by George Orwell. He's like, I can make this work if I work harder. Yeah. And that was me. I had that mindset. So I was so oblivious to the fact that...
Because that always worked for you in business and fitness.
100%. And, you know, to the man with the hammer, the whole world looks like a nail. I assumed I could do what made me successful there and it would make me successful in a relationship. And then when Paul, and like I rang him one day just fucking crying on the phone. And he was like, mate, your 100% is still only 50% in a relationship. He goes, there's nothing else you could have done. And
it can never be more than 50.
It can never. You're even...
That's so powerful for people to hear, because I think when a relationship is ending or you can feel someone distancing themselves, I know so many like men and women listening know that feeling of when the person you are seeing or talking to or in a relationship with is slowly just kind of, things are fizzling or they're pulling away. You think you can jump to that 60%, that 70%, meet them and pull them back again. You just can't.
You can't.
You can only ever be 50.
And when he said that, one stopped the flood of tears. That was the worst thing with the breakup, because very old school Irish, I'd say, Nathalie, I've cried 3 times in my life up until the age of 35, and I'd say 2 of them were skint knees when I was 6. And what happened when I first got upset about 2 or 3 weeks in, and something external happened, that I just lost it. And it was one of those, and this is a weird thing to admit, but I just want to say it because I think a lot of men messaged me when I mentioned this on my podcast, that it was one of those moments where when I started to cry, I couldn't stop. And I felt like it was never going to stop. And that, as somebody that is a recovering control freak, when it comes to other areas of life, I really struggled with that. It just wouldn't fucking stop.
Do you think that was maybe partly because you were able to kind of push it underneath the mat for so long with so many other aspects of your life for years, or because it was just this one breakup or parting that hurt so bad? Combination.
A combination, but more so because I've been very lucky in my life that I've never had to grieve anything. Okay. Like I've had, death of family members when I was younger, but no one in the sense of, in my adult life, my mother's alive, my father's alive, my sister's alive, my daughter's alive, people that are close to me. So grieving to me was something very foreign. And what I didn't understand, and what I know now that I didn't know then, was you have to grieve the relationship, but you also have to grieve the future, what that relationship was going to look like. Yes. And I didn't know that at the time, because I had set up my entire life, Nathalie. I was building a house for us. I had set up where we were going to, I was going to build a gym beside it. I had all of this work done, thinking we're going to settle down, have a family. This is it. And
I can see why you didn't want to let that go and why you wanted to go beyond that 50 mark, because what was life if it wasn't exactly what you thought it was going to be?
And the irony is we have...
my heart is breaking just hearing this.
But I'm, just to clarify, in a very good place now.
There's not a bother on it, but just when I put myself back in, tried to put myself in your shoes last, say, September, it's just you would not wish it on anyone. But from there, what happened?
From that October and November, I had to do a lot of work, a lot of reflection, a lot of journaling. I actually did, I don't know if we should I'm not promoting this, but I did several ayahuasca retreats to try and unpack what the fuck was going on.
Yeah.
And
whatever you have to do, I think the main thing is you acknowledged that there was something wrong and you were trying to heal. I think a lot of people don't try to heal and they push it underneath the mat and they move on to the next person, or they become consumed by something else just to block out the feeling of heartbreak and having to process. Be that, alcohol, be that, for me, I've had one bad breakup. I've had heartache maybe numerous times, but I've had one breakup which I can relate to so much of what you're saying in. Now, we weren't engaged, but I did think he was the one, and I did think we were just about to move into an apartment together. I was only 20 or 21 realistically. It was probably a little bit young to be thinking that. But I do think that the fact that you were just addressing it and knowing I need to heal and I need to get to the end of this is something that is really inspiring, and that people should know it's not easy to do, but you have to do it, because otherwise it's just going to resurface later on in life. One statistic that I just want to put out here, before we met up today, I was just trying to research a little bit more about kind of females versus males in breakups. And I think so often males do hide all of this. They don't speak about it. They don't show their emotions. You couldn't help but do it this time. After a breakup, there was this study, I think it was over 3,000 people, showed that 1 in 5 women suffer with depression after a breakup, but 1 in 3 men suffer with depression after a breakup, which is a lot more men. And I wonder how many of them speak about it. And I think that's because they're not addressing it. But you did.
It's funny, and I agree completely. And you mentioned something there I want to just pull back on, that I was so aware that if I didn't heal this now, I was going to carry the baggage into a future relationship, and I didn't want to do that. And what's interesting that I know now was the reason the breakup hit me so hard. And I read a lot on Jungian psychology off the back of this, and Jung talks about the shadow side, about the side that you're not willing to look at, the parts of yourself that you either are embarrassed about and shamed about, or don't feel confident in bringing to the forefront. And what happened with me, and this is something I really struggle to admit to myself, but now I'm in a place where I'm happy to admit it publicly, is I had such a low self-worth.
Okay.
That when the person who I loved more than anybody, with the exception of my daughter, loved more than anybody on this planet, when that got taken away, it made me question all of that self-worth. And I know self-love is a bit of a kind of a woo term, and some people love it, some people hate it, it cringes with some. But that got taken away. And
I think self-worth, self-esteem, self-love, same umbrella.
Same umbrella. It's interesting because something I talked about in the podcast with Louise Carroll, who's a psychologist and focuses on relationships, was the difference between self-confidence and self-worth. Like, I have very high self-confidence and I have very high self-respect. My self-confidence is my ability to execute on external things. I have very, very high self-confidence. I would say it's a 9 or a 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
But my self-worth was, when my partner left at the time, it was a 0 or a 1.
And Brian, would you have said that before she left?
I didn't realise it was a blind spot.
Okay.
It was a blind spot. I didn't realise I was putting so much of my worth into this.
Into what she was giving you and into being with her and the future that you were going to build.
100%.
Okay,
and
yeah.
That was
a scary revelation, because you can't just, bring it from a 0 or a 1 to a 10 all of a sudden. No. There is a lot of work in every baby step there to get to the next level.
Well, I had to ask myself, what was it that my partner was giving me at the time that I wasn't giving myself? And that was a big lesson and chunk of my healing for building up. And I realized that I wasn't giving myself that self-care. I wasn't looking after myself in the way that I should. Like, it's funny because I'm a fitness guy. So my self-care, and because I walk around in good shape, etc., I self-punish heavily. Like, one of my coping mechanisms, and I drank a bit during the breakup, but I was exercising 2-3 hours a day.
This is a question that I had ready to ask you when it comes to like the steps of rebuilding yourself, because you have done that. You are like living proof that you can. That's what I did when it comes to, I suppose, blocking out the feelings. I was like, I just don't want to have to think about it. I'd rather continue to, we often hear this phrase as if it's a positive thing. And typically it is. When you're struggling or you're stressed, someone will come to you and say, control the controllables. I say it to myself. I say it to my partner. He would say it to me. My parents say it to me. It's often said at times when I'm stressed. But when it came to heartbreak, and like that, I'm exactly what you said at the beginning, a controlling person, but being self-employed, you have 100% control, and being in the relationship, you realize you can't control everything. So when that was gone, I could control my caloric expenditure and my calories in as well. And that is where I just continue to spiral and knock my self-worth into a deficit, into a minus. But my self-confidence, like you said, was probably a fake 10. But I didn't realize that it was like, do you know that kind of iceberg image that we always see?
Yeah.
Underneath, the self-worth was huge, but I was still coming out with this little bit of self-confidence on top that no one realized. Training for hours on end, I could not relate to anything more. And that's where I think there's a lot of damaging messaging on social media sometimes. I don't know if this is something you may have said maybe before this happened. I genuinely don't know. You know, like the revenge body.
Yeah. Breakups make bodybuilders is something I've said. Yeah.
Sometimes that's a good thing. Look, you're channeling your energy into something that may be healthy for you, depending. For males, it's easier to recover from bodybuilding. For females, I developed an eating disorder because of that. So when it comes to your training and that spiraling, long story short, could you dive into that a little bit more? How did you stop that from spiraling further and it developing into, like what it did for me, something that I thought I could never get out of?
I knew I was running away and I knew I was avoiding. And what I had to do, and I've been a long-term meditator for the last 12, 18 months because of something that has really supported me with other areas of life. But I had to really sit with it. And there was one time, and it's weird, breakups are so fucked up sometimes because feelings that come up can be really uncommon. And I would have said prior to this, anger is not something I generally feel that often, but I felt rage during the breakup. I remember there was one point I was in the gym and my friend Orla was in there as well, and I was throwing a medicine ball against the wall and she was like, you need to go home. She was like, you need to go home. She's like, you need to not be here. And I remember going home and I had to pull the car in on the way because underneath anger is sadness. If you get rid of enough anger, there's sadness underneath.
Yeah.
And I remember pulling the car in on the way home because I just was fucking crying. And I just couldn't, this was so foreign to me and so new to me. And didn't tell my closest people at the time what was going on.
That came into my mind because one of the like typical steps for building yourself back up after a breakup is to have a support group, family or friends. But like you said, your closest friends are dotted around the world. You don't necessarily want to go to family straight away. You feel like you want to process things yourself first. But is it possible?
No. My friend Orla, who is based in Galway, and my sister and I have an incredibly close relationship. She's one of my best friends. She's an incredible, she's just a wonderful, wonderful human being. And both of those were two that I leaned on and they were incredible. And then what made probably the biggest difference was I joined a CrossFit gym in December at Wildway in Mycullen in the west of Ireland. And I remember the West is the best. And I remember Orla said to me, she's like, you need to be around people. She was like, stop isolating, you need to be around people. So I said, okay, I'm going to join this gym. And they have incredible members in a community. And
did you find that uncomfortable initially to be around people? Because I know when I was going through heartbreak, again, I wanted to isolate myself as well. But I really struggled to break out of that. I nearly fed my insecurities from being on my own. But I also fed my insecurities even more from being with people. At the beginning, I really struggled.
Not by December.
Okay.
Not by December. October, November, I didn't want to be around anybody. And they were low points. And, I know it's a Jungian quote that for your branches to reach up to heaven, your roots need to go down to hell. And
for your branches to reach up to heaven, your roots need to go down to hell. You have said so many quotes. You come out with these bangers, and I'm going to have to listen back to this and record them myself. The first one, before we move on further, the first thing you said at the start of this episode, your mess becomes your message. You have no idea how many times I have used that quote. I'm pretty sure I've said it here numerous times. And it's from listening to your podcast, I'd say back in 2017, 18, when I was struggling with my eating disorder, my fitness obsession, and my breakup. And I was like, this is all going to come to fruition at some point because my mess is going to become my message. I just feel like I need to let you know how, we were only speaking about earlier on, how you don't know how many people you're helping by sharing a story. That is one quote that I've taken with me for the last 6, 7, 8 years that has always gotten me through any mess, because I was like, I'll have a message to share at the end of this, like you were doing right now. But back to said quote. Okay, so for your branches to reach up to heaven, your roots need to go to hell. You feel like you went through this?
I 100% did. That dark night of the soul. And I remember because that night went on forever. And like I remember just literally, it was October. I was hugging my toilet bowl and I was crying and I couldn't get up. And I couldn't get up. I was lying on a cold floor and I just couldn't get up. And after what felt like hours, probably was close to it, it was a voice like I'm not super religious or anything like that. So either my own voice or something else of just get up, just lift yourself. And I did, and I brought myself back to bed and I fucking cried myself to sleep that night. And then I woke up the next day and it was actually when I signed up to the ayahuasca retreat, which helped. There's shamans in Spain from Bolivia and Colombia that I really trust. And that kind of gave me a little bit of an opening for what was going on. I don't recommend that for people. That was my path and my route and what I did. And it's part of my story, but it's not a recommendation. Yeah. So October and November were difficult. December, because it had been the previous December, we got engaged. And I thought 2024 was setting up for a wedding.
Oh, God.
And
my heart, I know you're over it all, but I have goosebumps. My heart feels so heavy. It's just so difficult to think you had to navigate through all of this.
It is. And the reason I share it is because for those who are going through it, to know that it gets better.
Yeah. You can navigate
through it. And I knew at some point I would get out of this. As dark as it was and as horrible as it was, I knew at some time it would pass.
Do you think the fact that you have such a strong history in success in business, you've started projects from scratch that have brought you to become a best-selling author, bodybuilding, you've started with, a body from scratch that has brought you to win competitions in bodybuilding. Do you think the fact that you have such a strong past of success when you set yourself a goal, I know that's slightly different, but you know what I mean when I say when you train for a goal and you reach it, like the Marathon des Sables, you know the power that you have, even when you kind of think you can't do something, you actually know that you're able because you had done those things. Do you think that this helped in any way, or because it's emotional, it's so different?
It's emotional, it's different. What's so funny about that, Nat, is I never thought I would spiral. Because I've done podcasts and I ran 230 kilometers through the Arctic. I tore my Achilles 86 kilometers and dragged my fucking leg behind me for 86K.
I remember you talking about this on your podcast after.
The most physical pain I've ever been in my life.
86K.
And I would do that 10 times over than experience the heartbreak again. There was no comparison. And why it caught me so left field and by blindside was I assumed or thought because I had done all these physical things that I could withstand anything. So it caught me blindsided.
Okay, yeah.
And then what I couldn't understand at the time was how the fuck can you do these intense physical challenges, but you can't navigate this emotional heartbreak and this feeling. So it actually went against me in that sense. What really helped was knowing that everything passes, but also you needed an anchor. Like one of the things, and this was the most beautiful quote I got or feedback I got from my families and friends, was my whole life felt like it was falling apart. But my daughter didn't know heart was breaking. And
She was your anchor.
she was my anchor. So every time, and I have an amazing relationship with her. I have an amazing relationship with her mother. It's a different woman from years ago, but we have a great relationship and a friendship. And she didn't know I was struggling. And I didn't want her to know I was struggling because that's not hers to carry.
Yeah.
Like, we put our shit onto our kids, and I didn't want to put, it's not her job to make me happy.
Yeah.
It's not her job. But by her being there,
that made you happy.
It made me happy. And it gave me an anchor. And I'm like, I need to be stronger. And I need to get through this because I'm the example. Like, I ultimately...
You often hear, I can't relate to that, but you do often hear of people saying, I only did this for my kids. They were the things that got me through it. And I know there probably are a lot of listeners who have children. And it's amazing that she was your anchor and that you recognised that and you addressed that and you saw that. For those people listening who maybe are going through a breakup and they want to find an anchor and they don't have a child, do you think there's any other anchor in life that you could tell someone to zone in on? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. I think Holly was my anchor, but I was also parallel to that, or just behind it, was knowing that what I mentioned earlier about your mess becoming your message.
Yeah, you are your anchor.
I'm my anchor. I was my anchor. I be the change you want to see in the world. I think it's a Nelson Mandela quote. And I knew when I got out of this, same as everything that I've struggled with in my life, mental health, anxiety, depression. I was suicidal as a teenager. I've talked about all these things on podcasts. And people talk...
Guys, you have to go and listen to Brian's podcast if you haven't, because there's so much value there.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you, Nat. But I knew there was something bigger to this. And in everything that we struggle with, all the suffering, all the pain, whether it's breakups or divorces or job losses or even death of loved ones, something I thankfully and very fortunate can't speak to directly. But it's all happening either for a reason to make you stronger or potentially for the next person. Maybe you had this terrible breakup because this wasn't your person. This was the one, but the one for now.
Yeah.
They're not your in-game one.
Yeah.
And
in the moment, that's so hard to acknowledge.
It is.
But it's not until you move into another relationship or situationship or just even a first date, you enter things completely different with a whole new level of communication and clarity that you never would have been, I don't know, is gifted the right word, but kind of granted without that heartbreak.
Yeah.
Although you wouldn't wish it on anyone, I am an immensely better communicator than I ever would have been if I stayed with my first love.
It gives you what you need. We spoke about this last week when we were chatting. When you come out of a relationship, particularly one that didn't work, and we had amazing years and probably one not so amazing year. And now coming out of that, and this is not something I looked at or thought about going in, because that was my first very serious relationship. The first time I was really in love, like full blown, all in, this is my person. But I failed to ask, what actually do I need from a relationship? And that's a question that is so obvious to me now. Like in any facet of life, in fitness or personal training or business, you'd be like, well, what do I need from a personal trainer? What do I need from a Spanish teacher? What do I need from a dance coach?
Yeah.
You're asking, okay, what do I need from this? Whereas I didn't do that with a relationship.
Yeah.
And sometimes, similar to what I mentioned earlier, like my ex is a great person. She's a wonderful, wonderful soul and will make someone very happy someday, hopefully. But square pegs go into square holes. And if you're a square peg trying to get it into a round hole because of a mismatch in needs or a dynamic that doesn't work, you're only forcing and making an inevitable end go on longer. And I know girls do this and women do this, particularly because I have a lot of female friends and I've talked to a lot on the podcast about people pleasing or giving up their needs because they want to make this relationship work.
Absolutely. I've done it myself, and not even relationships. You're only starting to see someone and you're romanticizing and building a future with them that could be, even though, and we kind of spoke about this beforehand, they could be making it clear that they do not want a relationship and they're not ready for one, but still, I do think as women, a lot of us don't really take that as being truth, or you just take it on as a challenge to think that you can change them.
It's so interesting. We talked about this right before we went on air. This only ever happened once in my life, because once in my life where the girl told me about it. I remember in 2017, 2018, I was at a very different stage in my life. It was preparing for Marathon des Sables, the 6 back-to-back marathons in the Sahara. I was after writing The Fitness Mindset, which did incredible. It was 16 weeks on the bestseller list and opened up so many doors and opportunities for me in terms of my work. And I remember meeting this girl in the gym, and I told her flat straight, I'm happy to go on dates. I'm happy to hook up and have sex, but I'm not looking for anything serious. And she's like, okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
2 months in, I remember she was like, well, what's going on here? Where are we going with this? And I was like, I told you. And she goes, I thought I'd be able to change your mind.
And that is it. When you told me that, I was like, I knew it. I knew this is what we did. I knew it's what women, it's the way we're wired. I wonder, is there any woman out there that would disagree with me on that? We think we can change a man even when he tells us, like, this is the clarity we want. This is the communication we ask for. And sometimes we get it and we just let it in one ear and out the other.
That was the first time though, Nat, where like I was like respect. Like we went our separate ways on good terms.
Yeah.
Because that was the first time, and I'm sure it's happened in other areas, but it wasn't as clear. Because I remember she just looked at me like, I thought I changed my mind. I like as if
square peg, round hole.
100%. And I was just sitting there going, okay, fair enough. I was like, will we just call it a day then? Neither of us are going to win from this because we both clearly want different things.
I know.
But it's interesting. It's an interesting dynamic how it plays out.
It is. And I've done that many times myself where I thought I could change a man. And ladies, you never can. If he says what he wants, that's what he wants. Hear him out on it. Brian, when it comes to that podcast that you did with Louise Carroll, I haven't listened to the whole thing. I need to. But I did see a section, and I think it kind of relates to what you were saying there, of where, you know, often you hear so many people saying that they hate their ex, and hate is such a strong word. But she made a really valid point where she said something along the lines of, do you really hate them, or do you just hate kind of this feeling? Or do you hate the process? Can you forgive someone and still cherish the time that you had? Or do you think that sometimes after a breakup, hate remains?
I can only speak from personal experience on this. And she was using the example of a very narcissistic relationship she was in where he was very cruel, and that she couldn't forgive that, and she possibly never will. But that doesn't mean she can't move on. But there's the other side of that coin, and we spoke about this before we went on air. Something I struggled with the most, and this was from the turn of the new year, was how you can still love somebody so much but not want to be with them. And that's where I was at in January. I still loved my partner, ex-partner, as much as I did 6 months, 12 months, 18 months before, but I didn't want to be with her anymore.
Yeah.
And I found that really confusing.
I can imagine. See, I relate to it because that's what I experienced when I was only 20. But I remember thinking exactly that. And I was so angry at myself because I was like, I don't want to love him. I hate him for what he did to me. This is not okay, but I love him, but I hate him. Why can't I just kind of unlatch that love hook that's still there and let it be completely hate? And that is because it is definitely true to say you can love someone and not be in love with them. I read this line that I thought was powerful, but something that we would both agree with, which was, no matter how long you and your ex were together, you both decided at one time or another to be part of each other's story. And that's something you should remember and cherish. Because I think until planning this podcast, there are a few people of my past that I was like, no, I do hate them. But then I was like, no, hold on, I don't. I remember that good time. I remember, and I need to cherish it because that's made me who I am today. I think you'd agree with that, would you?
I would agree. And it's funny because for a large portion of my life, I thought the opposite of love was hate. And they're not. They're two sides of the same coin.
That blew my mind when you said that.
The opposite of love is indifference. And sometimes when you love somebody, but you can't be with them, it's easier to feel the hate on the opposite side of the coin. When in reality, what you really want is indifference. But for whatever reason, you can't feel that yet because the lessons haven't been learned or the emotions haven't cleared. And a big wake-up call for me, and what I struggled with the grieving process, similar to the quote you gave there, was when you understand that somebody who you thought was a main character in your story turned out to only be a chapter, a very important chapter in my case, but a chapter nonetheless. That's when the grieving process can start.
That's really powerful. The grieving process, it's a different, I suppose, time length for everyone. if you were to give advice to someone listening as to how they could navigate this process, or I'm sure they're going, how do I make this time pass quicker? Would you have any advice there?
I will paraphrase. I have David Kessler on the podcast next week. He's one of the world's leading experts in grief.
Oh, wow.
And his line is, when people ask, well, what's the two misconceptions around grief? One is the worst type of grief. He's like, the worst type of grief is yours.
It's all relative. Like,
it's yours.
What you're experiencing at this time is valid.
Exactly. It's the worst type of grief is yours. And second, that grief has a timeline. That people think it's been 6 months, it's been 12 months, it's been 3 years. You might need that long to grieve. A death of a loved one, a relationship, a divorce. You might need longer than somebody else. And I can only speak firsthand because this was very foreign territory for me, because I have subscribed in the past to get over someone, get under someone, jump straight back into something, have sex with lots of different people.
Yeah.
And that can help. I couldn't do that this time. The thought of it actually made me sick for months. And it took me nearly 7 months now to get to that point.
Yeah.
And then now it's lifted.
Do you think that's because this time the love was so much deeper?
A combination of the love being so much deeper, and I was very mindful, but I realized I was 50% of this 100% to not rupture a potential future, because I was holding on to hope that there might be a reconciliation. When I realized there wasn't, I could at least kickstart, I need to move on.
Yeah.
I just can't force this.
Yeah. And let's say in the past, when it was that I'll get under someone to get over someone mindset.
Which is really fun, by the way, but just doesn't really fucking help.
Practice safe sex.
Yeah.
Did that ever, like you just said, it was really fun, by the way. Was there ever a moment, because we all know that a lot of people do that. And I'm not saying males do it more than females. I think maybe males potentially vocalize it a little bit more. I do think, like, in the boys' room, it's something that they joke about. And even speaking to male friends of mine, I'm like, how can you just say it like that and treat her like she was just worth nothing bar her body? That really frustrates me when I hear guys talk that way.
But I will give you a counter argument to why we do that in a minute and to what women do as an equivalent.
Okay, yes. Well, my question kind of was, do you ever, or did you ever in the past, after those, say, one night stands or, trying to get over someone that way, feel like bad or wrong in any way? Or did it actually help you get over the initial person?
I'm not the best one to ask on that, because
it wasn't necessarily the same depth of love that you had.
I hadn't felt it.
Recently.
This was my first real experience with love as an adult.
But that's where I wonder, when people are able to get over someone by getting under someone, when they can actually do that and they don't have a whole lot of baggage to process that's been pushed underneath the mat, maybe that love just wasn't deep. Because I like to believe if it is a really deep love, they won't be able to do that. Or if they do, there will come a time where it resurfaces and they'll have to process it.
That, or if your self-worth is so tied into your opinion of being with somebody else and feeling validated physically and sexually by somebody else, you're going to seek that external validation in others. I think it's not it's an if or but. Some people will get it and it might not have been that deep. And I've had relationships that I've came straight out of and I've gone onto Tinder or different dating apps and it was just bang, 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 bang.
Yeah.
I'm using that literally and figuratively. And that was fine because I wasn't super serious about the relationship.
Yeah.
But there was other scenarios where if your self-worth is tied to the external validation, it's very easy to tie up sexual conquests or encounters with that. And that is a slippery slope.
External validation and seeking that from others. So that was me before I went through my really complicated, messy, disordered healing path. And I always have this feeling of hate and haste towards my past because, like, say at the time of recording this, I went to Olivia Rodrigo last night with my cousin and she's 21 and she's achieved so much. And I was 21 when everything went south for me. And I feel like I lost 5 years where I couldn't get into a relationship. I couldn't fall in love. I couldn't picture myself with anyone because I didn't love myself. Because before that breakup, I think all I did was seek external validation. And then sharing a before and after picture that went viral. I think I said this on your podcast years ago. That was all I placed my self-worth in. When I lost it from him, I then got it from people on the internet. And then when none of that was enough, no matter how many followers were growing there, I was left with such an empty feeling inside that I didn't know how to validate myself. I didn't know how to find what was underneath that umbrella of self-love, self-esteem, self-worth. And that was so difficult to, I suppose, to build. And it's not a process. Like, it took me a solid 3 or 4 years. It wasn't a 6-month process to build it and then be like, you know what, I am ready now to meet a person who I want to spend the rest of my life with. People that I've met before the relationship I'm in now, I never really thought, yeah, I want to spend the rest of my life with this guy. It was more of a like, yeah, maybe we'll see. I feel like I should, because that's the way society goes. But I hadn't fully healed. I hadn't fully built those pillars underneath that umbrella. Self-worth, self-esteem, self-love. And it just takes so much therapy and healing and uncomfortable time on your own. I think you would agree with me there, to build up internal validation.
I think the build-up process, and I agree completely, is very independent or subjective to the person, because different people will have different things come up.
I think if you're a highly sensitive person, do you follow, or have you ever had Dr. Clodagh Campbell on your podcast?
No.
The wellness psychologist. She would post a lot about being a highly sensitive individual. You know, there's certain traits. If I'm in a loud room, walking to the concert last night, going into the three arena, I couldn't focus. I couldn't make conversation with my cousin. I didn't know where to look. I felt like I wasn't in the moment. I was in some weird outer sort of ego thing. I couldn't take anything in because there was way too many like stimuli. I'd be a very highly sensitive person when it comes to emotions, but also noises and stimulus, that I think I feel so much deeply, or more deeply, when something is said to me. And maybe that's why it took me so much longer to build that, like with you saying that it's so relative and individual dependent. I think that's why if you're a highly sensitive person and you know that listening, it may take you a bit longer, but you'll get there.
100%. And just to play counter to that, because I can actually offer the opposite end of the spectrum, because I'm not a sensitive person.
Yeah.
One of my superpowers, which is also my kryptonite, is I am very good at blocking out the world and their opinions, good, bad, indifferent. I feel I'm here for a purpose, for a mission, to help people, to serve. I live my entire life off that principle of making the world a bit of a better place because I was here. But that I can go through the world of social media and have negativity or any sort of hate aimed my way, and it doesn't connect with me. But the kryptonite is I have a close circle of 5 or 6 people whose word means everything to me. And my partner at the time was in that. So when she left, that made me question everything. I had a big issue with self-trust off the back of this, because we said this earlier. I was so certain it was in game. I was so certain.
When you get down on one knee, of course you are.
I was certain, and I never wanted to get married, Nat. I never wanted to get married. I was and I've been vocal about this early in my podcast days.
Yeah, I think I remember this.
Yeah, I was like, I don't want to get married. I don't believe in it.
Don't believe in monogamy.
Don't believe in it. It's not even that I didn't believe in monogamy. I just didn't believe in marriage.
Yeah.
I didn't believe in. I hadn't experienced love to the extent that I had, and it wasn't until that I'm like, yes, of course, I want to commit myself to this person and show them that I'm as committed. It was my physical representation of the commitment. That's what the engagement meant to me.
Yeah.
And when I'd convinced myself, and that self-trust is something that you build up over time, similar to the self-confidence. Everyone has different shit that they'll carry out of a relationship. Mine was self-trust, because I was now questioning everything. I was like, how was I so wrong about something I was so certain about?
Yeah.
And
that's where you can struggle with trust in future relationships.
100%. But it's funny, because I went out on a couple of dates in February with a girl, and I was like, something's not sitting right here. And I remember it was my friend Orla, again, who I've mentioned several times, and Paul as well did this. I was like, there's something not right about this girl. It's just not sitting right. And I don't know why. She seems really nice. And then she actually sent me like a message that, I won't get into the detail of the message, but it was a bit passive aggressive on not replying in a specific time period. I'm like, we hadn't been seeing each other, or we hadn't had sex. We'd kissed once, and that was it. And I was like, okay. Right.
Your gut.
My gut was right here. And something I came across, which is very interesting, is a term. Have you heard of trauma tingles?
No.
Where your central nervous system, that the butterflies we get when we meet somebody, and you have to ask the question.
I've heard this about the butterflies.
Yeah, so the butterflies you meet when you get somebody, sometimes the butterflies can be down to, if you're talking kind of inner child work, or a familiarity. Like Alain de Botton has a great line and a great quote, that we don't seek out in relationships what's good for us, we seek out what's familiar. And butterflies and those trauma tingles sometimes aren't a sign that you're attracted to this person because they're good for you. It's because they're familiar in terms of the response they're setting off. A father wound, a mother wound, a previous breakup, something else. And historically, I've got that check-in wrong. I always assumed and thought the butterflies were a good sign. And something I come back to now, and I'm stealing it directly from Alan de Botton, is you shouldn't feel like that fire of butterflies with somebody. It should feel like a warm pair of slippers when you meet somebody. There should be a comfort and a safety as opposed to a nervous system response.
And I think you just know that difference only after having the butterflies that were actually kind of dark, toxic butterflies.
Yeah. But that's it. You have to experience it.
I had heard a quote similar to that. I can't remember it word for word now, on a Jay Shetty podcast, where he did say, like, we often return to kind of exactly that, what is familiar, even though it may be a really toxic situation, you're comfortable in it, rather than moving to like a secure uncertainty. You go to this like insecure and scary certainty because it's just what you know. And that's where it can be hard to break that pattern and seek out the new person. Like, you often hear probably men and females saying, why do I always go for this type of person? Do men say that as much as women do?
100%.
Do you think?
It's funny, Nat, I don't mean to cut across you.
No, this is why you're here.
Yeah, but something that I had to unpack a lot off the back of this, and this is more going back over the last probably 15 years. And this isn't to sound disrespectful to anybody, because everyone is going through their shit. And I've had my own, particularly father wounds. I didn't have a very good relationship with my dad growing up. We have a great relationship now and I love my dad, but we didn't.
Amazing.
We had a very toxic, clashing relationship growing up. And something that all through college, all through my 20s when I lived in California and I lived in London, you put 100 women into a room and 5 of them had dad issues, I could tell you it was the 5 because it was the 5 I was attracted to. By energy alone. And I didn't know that was a pattern. And that pattern would repeat itself over and over again.
Yeah.
And if you can't see your patterns, you can't break them. But
how do you see them?
Looking for common characteristics, traits, or feelings with somebody. I wrote in Rewire Your Mindset, my second book, that if somebody calls you a horse, it's weird and it's on them. 2 people call you a horse, it's a conspiracy. 3 people call you a horse, it's time to get some saddle and some hay.
Yeah.
And I think it's similar with relationships. If you go back on your last 3, 4, 5 people that you're either going out with or dating, and they have similar characteristics, i.e. they're emotionally unavailable, or they treat you really good and love bomb at the beginning and then pull away, or they've got anxious or avoidant tendencies in terms of attachment style, and they all have these similar traits, you're attracting that.
Yeah.
You're pulling that in for some reason.
The Jay Shetty quote was toxic certainty. You're returning to toxic certainty rather than untoxic uncertainty.
Yeah.
Yeah. I relate to that as well. I think it was kind of like toxic masculinity I was attracted to in guys. And I would just always end up feeling like I was worthless as a result. And finding something that wasn't that. It was like that warm slipper feeling, yes. But because it wasn't the same butterfly feeling. It was butterflies, but like it, when you say warm slippers, that makes more sense. There was also this immense fear. And I think there still is, and that's okay. You have to feel the fear and do it anyway. But an immense fear. It's like, do I really want to let my walls down and maybe get hurt again? And also this is good. Like, how is he communicating so well? Like, why is he listening so attentively? And you're kind of like, you're waiting for the red flag because there's always a red flag. And you'll nearly run away before you see this imaginary red flag because you now believe that it's there because he's not showing it. Do you get where I'm going with that?
Yeah.
Rather than like pushing through that and realizing that it's actually not there. But you had just played so many mind games. You ran away from this person before allowing yourself the chance to see that they didn't have the flags that the other men or women did, that they showed you straight away.
But that's a very common dynamic. It's called the anxious avoidant dance. I had Jessica Baum on the podcast. She wrote the book Anxiously Attached, and the attachment styles, for anyone unfamiliar, is secure, avoidant, and anxious. And that anxiously attached style is where
An avoidant.
An avoidant is someone
There's
that,
a combination of the two somewhere.
yeah, yes, anxious avoidant.
Yeah,
Anxiously avoidant is the combination. But normally it's called the anxious avoidant dance. It means that one person is highly anxious, the other is avoidant. And the more that the avoidant person pulls away, the anxious person comes towards them. And then the roles can flip. And you have this weird dance going on.
Oh my God, that's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't hear anyone describe it as a dance before, but when you say that and when I can see your hands doing the dance, I'm like, yes, I have done this dance.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so have I.
It's so true.
Yeah, but again, I won't say knowledge is power because it's a cliche, but applied knowledge is very useful.
Yeah.
And when you know that's going on, you can at least either have the conversation to be like, look, we're doing this dance. Neither of us want to be doing this, assuming neither of you want to be doing this, and you can then work through it potentially, or you get out of the relationship, or you remove yourself before there's further damage.
Yeah. Brian, I want to ask you one or two more questions. One, and you don't have to answer. You said you didn't believe in marriage before, your past engagement, which obviously was such an incredible deep love. And I'm so sorry you went through all that, but it's great to hear that you still have so much respect for her and things are on good terms. I think that gives people hope that no matter where they are in a breakup, it can get to that. But you obviously did believe in marriage then. Do you now?
I should probably just add as well, I'm on good isolated terms with my ex-partner. We don't have a relationship or friendship now.
It's funny because, again, I was looking up statistics. Apparently, 60% of people have stayed friends with an ex after a breakup. And I just think that's way higher than what I know it to be for anyone. I feel like that must be years down the line. But I think that's a healthy way for it to be.
Yeah. And again, this is in this moment in time because there's no one can see the future. But just, I don't want people to listen to this and think, okay, things are good. They're friends now. They have a relationship. It's just...
Well, look, I'll be your devil's advocate. I do not have that with, I would say, 80% of my exes. Not like I have a million exes, but I don't. We don't really talk. If I bumped into them on the street, I wouldn't ignore them. I might say hi with haste, which is terrible. But I do feel hard done by in some situations, and that's probably just because I never got an apology. Whereas then there's probably 20% that I'm like, probably 2, maybe 3 people, they weren't serious relationships, but I'm like, yeah, we actually could have a conversation, could sit down, could get a coffee and it would be fine. Everyone else, isolated acquaintances, if even that.
And neither are right or wrong. I just wanted to add that.
It's all relative.
It's all relative. Do I believe in marriage now?
You don't need to answer that. That obviously, for anyone listening, that is a mindset that can change.
It is a mindset that can change. As of now, today, in May 2024, no. But I've changed my mind on it before, and I think it's really important that you give yourself permission to change your mind about things.
Yeah.
And I am open to having my mind changed about that again.
Change is the one constant in our lives as humans. Which I always think is really powerful. I think it might have been you that said on a podcast before, like, change is the one thing we're guaranteed, and it's also the one thing we are most fearful of and run away from. Yeah. It'll be interesting if we speak to you on hopefully the dating games in the future to ask you that same question. Do you know the way we were just saying earlier on about how you say something to a woman and she's like, yeah, that's what I'm going to change about him. There's thousands of women listening now going, yeah, I'm going to change his mind on that. Prepare for your DMs to explode.
Yeah, that's it. I was going to say, I'll pop my number in the description below.
Brian Keane, this has been a longer episode than I even intended for it to be, and I think such an incredibly valuable one for so many people. You've said it to me, and you know it yourself. You have no idea how many people you are helping by sharing this story, which I know is not easy. I know it's probably become a little bit easier. That never makes it easy. I am beyond grateful. I will not have the words to thank you enough for sharing this experience, and especially as my first guest on season 3 of the Dating Games as a solo host, but you are my co-host. I'm so grateful. Obviously, I want you to let people know where they can go to find you.
Oh, thank you so much. And thanks for facilitating such a great conversation, Nat. As I mentioned, it was mentioned a few times on my podcast, and I had men messaging me going, she broke my heart. Someone left. I don't know what the fuck I'm going to do. And knowing that because I'm quite bro and quite laddie. I'm, my content's quite broy.
He's a hardy country man.
Yeah, hardy West of Ireland farmer. And people are like, okay, at least I feel like I'm not alone. And hopefully this podcast will do something similar. For my socials, I'm on everything. Instagram's the main thing, Brian_Keane_fitness. And then the podcast, we've got a couple of episodes on there too.
Yeah.
2 very different episodes,
Completely.
so people can search that.
Yeah.
But the Brian Keane podcast.
Brian, thank you so much. Now, we are going to have another episode with Brian, which is going to be a little bit more fun and upbeat. So keep your eyes peeled for that one. And in the meantime, don't forget to share this podcast with your friends, with your fam, maybe with your partner. You could both improve for your relationship. Be sure to rate it and subscribe wherever you are listening. And please feel free to send me a message with any feedback, topics you'd like, or maybe other co-hosts in the future. As I always said, and will continue to say, we'll love you and we'll leave you. Brian, any last words?
I will. And because you've just such a bubbly finish now, and I'm going to leave it on something a little bit worse.
That's the radio personality in me.
I have a quote, Nat, that I want to leave, and I'm a big man for a quote, as you already know. But my brain tattoo, and it was my screensaver on my phone.
Even that, brain tattoo. Oh my goodness, powerful visualization.
It's literally my October and November, and it was on my phone for my screensaver. And just for anyone that is struggling, I love the quote that when the caterpillar thought the world was about to end, it became a butterfly.
Brian, that is powerful. Thank you.